here with Desi Jensen, our HR director, and we're super excited to be able to walk through and hopefully help you navigate some of the changing and shifting and really gray areas in the labor laws that have been pushed out just here recently. Just a couple things that'll help during our webinar today and give you a heads up. One, if you go ahead and mute your microphone. Second, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat box at the end of today. We'll take some opportunities to answer some of your contextual questions and help you navigate some of the situations you're in. The third one is questions will be answered at the end of the presentation today. What we're going to walk through today is we're going to talk through the ministerial exceptions when it comes to labor laws and as they apply to two specific laws that we're working through today: exempt and non-exempt employees, and then contractor and employees, the relationship to your organization for that. Just a little bit about Novum Partners. We started Novum Partners a few years ago to come alongside faith-driven leaders, really as your most trusted advisor. And we do that through three areas. One, we have an incredible back office team providing accounting, payroll, and HR. We work with strategic engagements, helping both leaders and organizations navigate getting off the ground, scaling, and then sustaining. And then honestly, we love to walk in the aspect of long-term partnership. As we get to know you, you get to know us. We believe that we can push your mission forward in a way that is both healthy and collaborative for you in the context in which you serve. But today, we're going to walk right through some HR pieces. Desi Jensen, her background, she's handled HR at the largest of church levels, the for-profit level, and we're super grateful that she does everything for us internally, but also helps many of our organizations on a weekly and monthly basis. Desi, thanks for sharing all of your expertise with us. But today, we really want to start with walking through what is the ministerial exception and who qualifies for the ministerial exception for labor laws.
Yes, and before we get into the other laws, this is definitely something that we want to look at as far as if somebody falls under this exception, then they are exempt from the overtime law.
So this is a trump card.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Now it's not something we take lightly. We want to make sure that the individual falls under this exception.
Okay.
So we don't want to take advantage of this and place a lot of people into the category. We really want them to fall under it. But the ministerial exception, what the federal and state governments don't want to do is really get involved in decision making or management decisions, who you're putting in pastoral roles. And so they provide a lot of independence in that area. It's not a law, but there are a lot of cases that have come in different states where the ministerial exception has stayed in place, and they have certain pastors have remained exempt. And so one of the exemptions falls under this overtime exemption piece, the FLSA's overtime exemption. One thing, it has to be, when you're hiring this position, there's certain things that you want to make sure. You want to make sure that the hiring aspect are based on religious criteria. So that's why you're hiring the person, not necessarily for the secular part of the role, but that it's a religious criteria that is really being considered in the hiring.
So an example of that would be a church that was hiring an accountant.
Right.
That's not necessarily a religious criteria. That's a non-religious technical job that the church is utilizing.
Yes.
So that accountant would not qualify for the ministry exception.
Correct. And is this person able to perform religious ceremonies? And another piece is, are they recognized by the church as clergy? Are they actually recognized as pastor, minister, whatever that looks like for your particular church? Are they recognized as that by the ministry? Do they engage in religious activities and services? And whatever your church's requirements are for recognizing somebody as a pastor or in a ministerial role, is an ordination, a divinity degree, licensing, whatever that looks like, that person should be recognized as such under the church's requirements. So that's what you would want to look at when you are looking at putting somebody under the ministerial exception. Pastor's pretty easy.
Right.
If you're not a pastor, then it starts to maybe get a little bit questionable after that.
So for the rest of the world, there are two major shifts that have happened or are coming up pretty
Right.
quickly. And the first one is really the salary compliance.
Mhm.
Why don't you walk us through both the salary level and the salary basis test?
Yeah, so the first thing is the salary basis test, and if your employee, let's say they don't fall under the exception, then is your employee getting paid a salary? Are they getting paid a minimum amount are they getting paid a salary every week? Not a daily rate, not an hourly rate, but at least a weekly minimum guaranteed salary. That's the first test. The second test is the salary level test. And that's where the changes have come into place. And this is going to be effective on July 1st. Currently, there's a salary threshold that if your employee makes over 35,598, which is $684 a week, they could be considered exempt. We'll look at the next test for it. But if they make under that amount, they cannot be exempt. You have to pay them overtime for any hours worked over 40 hours a week. Effective July 1st of this year, that amount is going up to 43,888 per year, which is about $844 per week. So if you have an employee that you're paying a salary to right now that's making less than 43,888, you are going to have to look at making some changes effective July 1st if you want to keep them at an exempt status. And we can go over that too.
And Desi, you've always been very kind to me to explain some of this jargon, exempt and non-exempt. Exempt being they do not qualify for overtime.
Exactly.
So whatever their salary is, whether they work 60 hours in a week or they work 20 hours a week, they're guaranteed that rate.
Right.
And what we're saying is to qualify for be an exempt employee, you have to make over $43,888
Right.
starting July.
Right. If for you not to pay an employee overtime, they have to make over that amount of money effective July 1st.
And so non-exempt employees would then get the fact that you're going to have to track overtime,
Mhm.
qualify for track hours, and
Mhm.
then qualify for overtime.
Right. If they work over 40 hours a week, exactly. And yeah, so anything under 4388, you're making sure you're tracking their hours and making sure you're paying that overtime. And also look at your state laws. There may be some state requirements as well. That amount goes up again January 1st to $58,656 per year. So you want to start really looking at that, looking at who falls under those amounts and how we're going to remain in compliance.
And now there are also, once you meet that qualification, there's another test to figure out what job function they actually do to still consider if they're an exempt or non-exempt employee.
Right. So it really depends on their job duties. What are they actually doing on a daily basis? There's three different exemptions. The executive exemption, which is more of your managers that are supervising two people that they really have the ability to hire, fire, to make all of those employment decisions, or they have a heavy authority or influence in making those decisions, and they're managing a department or a division of the organization. And the job duties are not routine. They're not routine job duties. Every day you do the same thing type of work. There's a professional exemption as well, which really requires advanced knowledge and advanced degree, like a divinity degree, where you have to have a certain type of degree to do your job. Maybe if it's like a therapist or a counselor, those types of things can be a professional. And then there's your administrative exemption as well. And this is the one that's a little bit gray and a little bit hard to determine. But again, it's non-manual work, but it's related directly to, you have to have independent judgment. You have to be able to use your own discretion without getting all of your decisions approved by your supervisor. You have to be able to make those decisions for that particular area of the organization.
And we see the word administrative. So oftentimes we think of maybe the word administrative assistant.
Mhm.
Would administrative assistant typically qualify for this exemption, or is the administrative exemption more of of, an accountant, HR
Exactly.
professional?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. more of a professional position, more of somebody that can operate, run their own department. Like I said, without having to go through various super approval levels. Clerical workers, administrative assistants, most of the time are not going to fall into this exemption.
Okay.
Most administrative assistants, you should be paying them at a non-exempt status and paying them overtime.
And let's solve this because the biggest thing that everyone needs to aware of is really tracking overtime and obviously paying
Mhm.
for that. And so one of the things that you shared in our webinar yesterday was that even if someone is making $20,000 a year, but they're only working 10 hours a week, well, we would go on a scale that's $80,000 a year. But because they're under the threshold of $43,000 and some change this year, we still would need to track their hours.
Exactly.
Okay,
Ex-
so basically, if no matter what, if someone's not making taking home uh, $43,000 come July 1, then their hours need to be tracked and they're be eligible for overtime.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah. However you determine to track it, best thing to do is track it daily. To make sure that you have really accurate records of what your employees are working. And I know it gets difficult sometimes. You have to go and track over for coffee or whatever those things are. Where you're meeting somebody for an hour here and there. You still want to make sure that they're tracking that overtime. So, however is the most effective or efficient way for your organization to do it, we want to make sure that you want to make sure that that's happening.
great. And the second really big, just kind of awareness, but a law that went into effect actually about a month and a half ago was clarification along the independent contractor and employee
Mhm.
relationship.
Yeah.
Why don't you unpack that shift for us?
Yeah, and before I move on to that one, we talked about this yesterday, and I think it's an important point. A lot of your employees, they want to help the church, they want to help your organization, and they will clock out once they hit a certain amount of hours, but continue to work within their particular role. You need to really avoid that. Make sure that they're clocking in for all of their hours that they're working. If they want to volunteer, have them volunteer in a completely different role, more of a volunteer type role somewhere else within the organization, but not within their specific job duties.
Okay. So an example of that would be if the worship pastor wanted to work and was under the threshold, and maybe a worship associate, but
Mhm.
she's a worship associate as an example here, was getting paid for 20 hours a week, but also wanted to volunteer to work on extra projects in the worship ministry. Those volunteer hours would still need to be tracked and they would be eligible for overtime.
Yeah, yes, eligible to be paid for those hours technically.
However, if they wanted to work 20 hours in the worship ministry and volunteer in the kids ministry on Sunday, that's
Off.
considered a volunteer.
Yeah.
Okay,
So find your areas where you need volunteers and kind of direct your people that way.
great. And so I'm glad you called that out because it was a point of discussion yesterday.
Mhm.
Why don't you unpack this independent contractor and employee relationship?
Yeah, so this is where it always gets fun, and it's even grayer than the last
Okay,
issue. So, the effective March 11th, the Department of Labor issued new guidance on how to analyze if whether workers should be an independent contractor versus an employee. There's various tests that various companies use. Now there's an economic realities test that the Department of Labor put in place, and it really looks at 6 different factors, and all of these factors, you're looking at the totality of the factors. Not one doesn't weigh heavier or weigh more than another. They're all equal. You have to look at everything when you're examining this. And churches are not exempt from this in any
okay,
way.
okay.
So there is the first one is there is an opportunity for profit or loss depending on their managerial skill. So if the person has an ability to lose money or make money, and not just wages, but to really lose or make money from a business perspective, then they would be considered an independent contractor.
So this would simply be a relationship with another entity,
Mhm.
somebody else who either had another nonprofit or another business, and you were paying the business or the nonprofit for service.
Exactly. Exactly. And some ways to look at that, can they negotiate their pay? Can they tell you how much they're going to charge rather than you telling them how much they're going to get paid? Can they decide whether to accept or decline work? Are they able to hire their own workers where they're doing the job and not necessarily the person that you specifically hired? Do they purchase equipment for their particular business? Those are the type of questions that you would look at and ask yourself when you're looking at this particular factor. The second one is are there investments made by the worker and the potential employer? Is a worker making capital investments in their work? Are they buying equipment that's going to build their business? If yes, that's an independent contractor.
Great.
The third one is the nature and degree of control by the employer over the worker. Does the employer set the worker schedule? Are they telling them when to work? Do they supervise their work? Do they have the right to discipline them for performance? You know, if you're hiring a business, you may not utilize them again, or you may not pay them, and then there's a breach of contract. Those types of things that could potentially that's an independent contractor. If you're able to discipline a worker, then they may be an employee. If you set their schedule, they're probably an employee. If you supervise their work, they're probably an employee. And so those are again the questions and that under that fourth or that third factor.
And a lot of this, I think one of the examples we work with a lot of, just pick on churches and worship ministry in particular right now, is hiring band members for Sunday worship or for a Wednesday night gathering. Uh, Technically, those contractors, unless they have their own business, because the worship ministry is setting the schedule, setting the set list, they technically should qualify as employees of the church.
Yeah. Yeah. Another piece to look at is like maybe what they're wearing. Another piece is are they using your equipment or are they using their own equipment? So we don't want to necessarily specify whether these positions within your church are a contractor or not. But again, looking at the totality of the circumstances, you can make that decision. The fourth one is the extent to which the work is performed as an integral part of the potential employer's business. You can kind of argue this one, but you know, if you hire a graphic designer, yes, that's obviously important, but it's not
Or to the business.
core to the business. So if the work is core to the employer's business, then they probably are going to be an employee. The fifth one is the degree of permanence of the work relationship. If it's sporadic, if it's project based, if there's a definite time frame, they can be an independent contractor. But if it's kind of an ongoing thing and there's no end date to the work, they're probably an employee. And then the last one is skill and initiative. And does the worker bring specialized skills to the relationship? Um, um, Obviously we hire people that are experienced or you know that have some expertise within their role, but are we bringing somebody in that's a specialist, or are we bringing somebody in where we're going to have to train and show them how to do a particular job? If there is training involved, then they're definitely going to be an employee. But if there are specialized skills, like I said, a graphic designer has a specialized skill that probably they're not going to be nobody's going to train them on, then they're going to be an independent contractor. So most importantly, making sure that you look at all of the circumstances and not just one or the other. Ensure you have an independent contractor agreement that's written out, that's signed by both of you. Also, don't track the contractor's hours. If you have any kind of time tracking system, my recommendation is to have them send or provide you with an invoice for payment. Maybe if it's on a monthly basis or however you pay your other vendors. Um, and then when you're uncertain, treat them as an employee. So, I mean, that's just the safest way to go. And I understand that there's some cost, issues with this, so it's obviously your decision. But if you are truly uncertain, then my recommendation would be to hire them as an employee.
And part of the big piece of this is not just how we care for people well in a way that reflects the heart of Jesus, but also in the space of if an employee ever leaves, and there was an issue, and God forbid there's a disgruntled employee that leaves, if they have paperwork that you didn't follow laws or they could verify, then you open yourself up to
Exactly. Yeah,
unmanageable lawsuits.
particularly on this overtime issue. If an employee does do that, leaves, and then realizes that they should have been paid all this overtime, then you're going to be responsible for back pay because you don't have any records to prove otherwise. So it really does protect the church or the organization when you're tracking hours.
Well, that was a quick overview of really the labor law changes and just some clarification on the ministerial exceptions, but wanted to take a moment and see if you had any questions in particular. You can either put on the chat, or if you'd like to come off mute, we're going to take a couple of minutes to answer those questions. But because we are recording this and you don't necessarily want your question recorded, I'm going to wrap up and just thank you for uh, following today, watching today, those of you who are connecting with us afterwards and watching this recording. If we can help answering your questions, feel free to email us at hr@novumhcm.com. And we'd love to be able to help you navigate just shifts, changes, and process through how do you best care for your team and your organization in the days ahead.